So I'm going to introduce myself on the second slide just to make things confusing. But my talk is basically what I would teach myself if I could go back 10 years. I started school at UAF exactly 10 years ago. And I didn't take economics. I didn't have Sherri. I didn't have all those benefits. And you guys are at a big advantage to where I was. So this is just going to be kind of what I would have told myself. So who am I? I'm kind of still working on that. That's the process of life, right? Figuring out who you are. My name is David Giessel. I'm 27. I work out at the Poker Flat Research Range as a research engineer. I got my master's at UAF here in summer 2009, and I became an economics junkie along the way. So how did I get interested in economics? Well, in 2001, when I was starting school here, we were in the midst of the dot-com bubble, which you guys may or may not remember. I remember it because I've lost money during it. Not much, but I'd inherited some money from my grandpa, and I put it in all these high-growth dot-com stocks, and they all went to zero. At the end of the bubble, the fund that I originally had like $8,000 in actually had less than the brokerage fee. So you had to pay $30 every quarter to maintain the fund, and I had less than $30 in it at the end. So that should have been a learning experience, but I'm kind of slow. So I took some time off, and then I got back into the markets in 2007, 2008. I started an IRA, and I wasn't getting any interest in the bank, right? So I was seeking yield. So I bought mutual funds in like 2006. And of course, 2007, 2008, you guys all remember that, I'm sure. And your parents definitely remember it. So I finally got sick of losing money. It was like, there's got to be a different way to do this. So I started boning up on economics. So what did I know just from my parents and growing up, not having the benefit of Sherri's wonderful course? My parents taught me that the debtor is beholden to the lender. Interest rates compound. There's a time value of money. I didn't know the flip side of that, the time value of inflation. And money makes life easier. So, and here we have a little cartoon with student loan debt and the burden that's going to put on some of you guys potentially. Hopefully not too much. I didn't have that either. I had a scholarship here. So what I didn't know. Yeah. Sometimes it's best not to know. But sometimes it's better to actually know, especially when your money's on the line. So that's just a short list of the stuff I didn't know. You guys are learning all sorts of things that are going to benefit you in life if you find out how to apply them. I also didn't know who any of these guys were. Some of you might recognize some names up there. Hopefully at the end of this class or after a couple of years you'll recognize more. So Benjamin Disraeli, who was a British Prime Minister, he says, as a general rule, the most successful man in life is the man who has the best information. And so I had no information, so I was just running blind. You guys are getting a lot of really good information in this class. It's going to help you guys. So I decided I needed to learn economics. So now what? Where do you start? So step one is admitting you have a problem. You don't know anything. So I thought I was just learning about money, right? That's why I got into it. But economics is actually the study of human action, as Mises said. And there's his pocket edition of his book. I don't know what kind of pocket, but so I was actually learning about myself, right? I was learning about the way the world works, not just about money and markets and wages and things like that. This applies to everything. So in human action, Mises has the action axiom, which it's a really brief little statement, then he writes 1,000 pages about it. And the action axiom is human action is purposeful behavior, or we may say it is action put into operation and transformed into an agency. It is aiming at ends and goals. It is the ego's meaningful response to stimuli and to the conditions of the environment. It's a person's adjustment to the state of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. So the axiom of action is that humans act. Right? It's very profound, but it has profound implications. So the study of human action is called Proxyology, and there's actually a YouTube channel, Prax Girl, and she's far more attractive than I am. So if you guys want to go out and learn about Proxyology without reading human action, just go to Prax Girl's YouTube channel, and she'll tell you all about it. you'll pay more attention to her anyway too. So these are some of the fundamentals that were the first things I learned, and they're what you're learning in this class. Mutually beneficial exchange, comparative advantage, division of labor, time preference, opportunity cost, all these things. And when you're learning them in a formal setting, they seem abstract, right? You learn some example, like you read about the minimum wage in, some other country, or, you're not earning a minimum wage job, so you don't think about how it applies to you. But these things apply to everything, and they change everything. This understanding changes the way that we view the world. So before modern economic thought, which started around 1600, 1700, you have human history being basically the same. From 1700 AD or 2000 AD in Egypt or 2000 BC to 1700 AD when this economic science was kind of born. People's lives didn't change much, right? You farmed with livestock, you sailed in wooden boats maybe. People didn't travel more than a few miles from their home in their entire lifetime. So you go 4,000 years and there's not much difference. And then you have the birth of economic thought, and these fundamentals are discovered, right? It's just observing human action. And so now we look at life in 2011, and we compare it to maybe life in 1900, 211 years. It's a totally different universe. It's a bigger leap going back 100 years in time than the previous 4,000 years, from that point. And even comparing 2011 to like 1950, right? Who would want to go back to 1950? So this stuff is big. There are some of the key fundamentals. I'm going to go through 4 of them here that I would have told myself, and I would have really emphasized if I were talking to myself 10 years ago. And the first one's mutually beneficial exchange. And so this is simple, right? It's when two people voluntarily trade, both people gain utility, right? But what does that mean, right? That means as long as two people are voluntarily exchanging goods, they're both becoming wealthier at the same time, right? No one's losing. Both parties gain. So the converse of that is that coercive action, right? Coercive trade always destroys wealth because someone is losing utility. And so this seems, simple. It's kind of a catchism, but it has deep implications for society. And I have this graph up here. I guess I don't have a pointer, but this is the government spending versus GDP for the United States. And so you see these little blips. You see one in 1813 with the War of 1812. You see the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and then you see all of our new little adventures, and that starts in 2001. So whenever the government is spending money, it's taking it from someone coercively, right? And since we can say that coercive action always destroys wealth, all these wars destroy people's wealth. And you see how the peaks never drop back. Like there's kind of a status quo. There's an equilibrium, and then you have a peak, and then it never drops back to the same amount. That's called the Higgs ratchet effect. This economist, Robert Higgs at the Independent Institute, came up with that characterization for this behavior. So every time that there's massive coercive action, not only is wealth destroyed during the war with all this spending that comes out of the productive economy, but it never goes back to where it was. It eventually does, because the ratchet gets wound up so tight that it explodes, and that's what happened with like the Roman Empire. So that's where we're headed, and that all comes out of mutually beneficial exchange. We can infer all this from this simple principle. So comparative advantage and the division of labor is another huge one. You guys are learning about that now. And the crux of it is it's good to not be good at some stuff, right? Let somebody else be good at it. In engineering, I had a professor who always said that people go into engineering because they're lazy, right? They don't like the way things are done. They want to come up with an easier way to do stuff. And that's how we get wealthier. We decide we're not going to do everything. We don't grow our own food. We don't make our own iPhone. We just go to the store and buy the stuff. And so you get specialization, and all these good things come out of that, and wages actually go up. So here I have, this is the Model T assembly line in 1913. Ford workers at the time earned the equivalent of 1 ounce of gold per week. So that's $1,600 a week, and there was no income tax. So they were earning $83,200 a year tax-free. And this is for like a moderately skilled labor job. So how many people think you could go to Detroit right now and make, $85,000 a year tax-free? Not going to happen. But even before this, right? You still have the same tax structure. But before you had this division of labor, car manufacturers, the employees who worked for them, couldn't afford to buy their own cars. They were poor because they had to build the whole car. It took a lot of capital and it took a lot of time. So when the division of labor emerged, these guys were rich enough to buy a Model T. So that was a huge step forward. Another big one is opportunity cost. And Murray Rothbard and von Mises in Human Action, they say that all cost is opportunity cost, right? Anything that you do, any decision you make means that you're not doing something else. If you spend your time one way, you're not spending it an infinite other number of ways. So as a corollary to that, nothing is free, right? Even if you get something at $0 cost, it takes your time and your energy and your space, right? So nothing's free. And by definition, when we make a choice to do something, we're also choosing not to do everything else that we could have done. So by definition, we always do what we value the most. So you hear people talk about, I wish I had the time to do this, or I wish I had done this. But they actually don't. When somebody does something, they're doing what is their highest value. And so for me, this has been big because when I'm faced with a decision, I kind of say, well, I really want to do this, but I'm going to do this instead. Well, I don't really want to do the one thing. I want to do the other thing more. And so this has helped me to be a lot more honest with myself in decision making. And the fourth one is subjective value, right? All value is subjective. This guy, his number one video on YouTube has almost 1 billion views, right? And so they can't be wrong, right? But of course, maybe I don't listen to him. Maybe I listen to like Skrillex or Deadmau5 or somebody like that. But we all have different values, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's not coercive, as long as we're interacting peacefully, and we have different values. That's where all these things like the division of labor come from, and comparative advantage. People like to do stuff that you don't like to do, which means you don't have to do it. So that's a terrific thing. That's not something to be frowned upon. And when I was younger, it was like, everybody should like the same music I like, or everybody should have the same viewpoints I have, and everybody should be an engineer like I'm going to be. But actually, the fact that everyone's not an engineer is why I could get a high-paying job. So subjective value is a beautiful thing. And the most important thing I would have told myself 10 years ago is about time. Time is the scarcest resource that there is. You can't buy more. You can't mine it. You can't find it somewhere. We all have a finite amount, and it's always running out. You're never going to be as young as you are right now. And it's hard to understand that when you're really young, because you're looking forward, you're not looking back, and that's good. But I would have emphasized this to myself. I have a little example for that. So Warren Buffett's, the richest guy in America, or whatever, by some metrics. But would you really want to be Warren Buffett? He's 81 years old. How much time does he have left? Or does he want to be you? Would he rather be a poor college student in his late teens, early 20s again? And even if he did want to be you, what amount would he give for that? I think he'd give everything to be 20 again, right? So this really emphasizes the point that time's all you have. Economics, being the study of scarce resources, means that all of this stuff applies to time. So if nothing else, you can take the stuff you learned in this class and you can look at how you're spending your time, how you're spending your life, and economize, because that's all you got. So the three big things from economics for me in life is time, value, and cost. So time is scarce. You're learning how to allocate scarce resources. Really take that to heart. On value, all value is subjective. Don't get hung up with other people having different value scales as long as they're not harming somebody else. Embrace variety. That's what gives you the division of labor. And different people with different value scales makes trade possible. When you go to Fred Meyer to buy something, if they valued it as much as you did, their prices would be higher. So be happy that people have different value scales. And as far as cost goes, all cost is opportunity cost. If you want to do something, do it. Don't mull over all the other things that you're not doing instead. Just go after it. It's your highest value. Do it. there's kind of another twist on economics that I got from Butler Schaefer's book Boundaries of Order, which I would have given a copy to myself 10 years ago, definitely, even though it wasn't written 10 years ago, so you guys have that advantage. He talks about society as a hologram or society as a fractal, and I'll talk about what those things are for the people who aren't familiar with those. These are kind of macroeconomic ways of thinking. So you guys have been studying microeconomics, which is the study of individual interaction. Macroeconomics just kind of lumps those all together into aggregates, but it's really the same thing. The saying is that microeconomists are wrong about specific things, and macroeconomists are wrong about things in general. So I'm going to take that for what it's worth. So a hologram here, this is top image. Basically, a laser shines through an image, and there's a series of mirrors that refract the light in different ways, and you get a three-dimensional image. And what's cool about a hologram is if you take the original image that you're shining the laser through, and you cut it into pieces, and you put one of those pieces back, so you cut it into like quarters. If you put a quarter of that holographic image back in, you'll get the same hologram. It'll just be smaller, but it's still the same. So you'd still get a human head. It wouldn't be a quarter of a human head. It would be exactly the same image, just shrunk down. And a fractal is kind of similar. A fractal is a mathematical phenomenon. And no matter how far in you zoom on a fractal, the pattern repeats. And so Butler Schaefer talks about society as a fractal or society as a hologram, with the individual, with you guys being the fundamental unit. So you learn about microeconomics, individuals interacting. Society is just zooming out, right? And so if you're the fundamental unit of society, that means that all of you have the power to change society. Even if you can't change your neighbor or, do something political, which, I think is overrated anyway, you can change yourself. You can change the hologram by changing yourself. And so that's a massive concept. And you're really the only person who you can change, right? You can't force someone else to change, but you can always change yourself. So he says, freedom is a state of mind that each of us must discover for ourselves. In doing so, we'll find that there's nothing that anyone in authority can do to make our world more peaceful, orderly, or free. So if we want to be in a peaceful world, if we want to be in a prosperous world, you're studying voluntary exchange and the fact that both parties profit from that, they both benefit. So that's how you make the world a better place, is you treat people the way that you would want to be treated. And economics just kind of reinforces that. It's kind of the rediscovery of the golden rule. So after I had told myself that, if I went back 10 years in time, I would talk about what's next. So when I started school in 2001, there was a stock market crash. There was fear of overpopulation, environmental fears, fear of peak oil, low employment, the bad job market. There was inflation was rising. There's all this bad stuff, right? We're all going to graduate into this terrible world, and we're all going to die, right? That was what I thought when I was you guys' age. And you guys are in a very similar world, right? It's just 10 years on. The only difference is you guys have all these wars going on. There's been war going on for half of your life. But you hear the same thing from a lot of people. The world's coming to an end, and us kids are going to get screwed. And it's not entirely true. So I was recently at a Casey research summit, and it's called When Money Dies, a really optimistic title for a summit. And this guy, Chris Martenson, gave a talk. And he was talking about the problems or the issues that we face as a society, as individuals. And he talked about it in terms of problems versus predicaments. And so what he said is a problem is something that has a solution, right? Whereas a predicament is something that has an outcome. So here you have the guy hanging from his buddy's foot. That's a problem, right? He could swing over to the rope and make it up the cliff, no harm. And then you have this other guy who's jumped off, right? He's going to get wet. It's not a problem. That's a predicament. He's going to get wet. So predicaments have outcomes. So the question is, what's the outcome going to be? Is it going to be, how bad is it going to be? How could it be made better? But it can't be solved. So today we have governments, currencies, and financial markets that don't have problems. They have predicaments. There are no solutions for some of these things. but there are outcomes. And it's up to us to figure out what those outcomes are, because our parents who created these predicaments certainly aren't going to do it. And one of the challenges that Chris talked about was the reason that these are predicaments is because they're exponential trends, and they have linear solutions which aren't going to work. And so I'm going to give you guys a little example, which again I stole from Chris Martenson because I'm horribly unoriginal. So he had this example where you take Yankee Stadium and you seal it off, so it's water. It'll hold water. It's basically watertight. And you handcuff, or you get handcuffed to the top of the bleachers up there where that railing is. And somebody goes down to the pitcher's mound and they have an eyedropper. And they drop one droplet of water on the pitcher's mound. And it doubles every second. So if second one you have one drop, then you have 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on. The drop is put on the pitcher's mound at 12 noon. So the question is, how long do you have until you drown? One drop of water that doubles every second is put on the pitcher's mound at noon. And you're handcuffed to the top of the bleachers. At what time of day do you drown? Does anybody want to venture any guesses?
7 p.m.
Okay. So the stadium will be full of water at 12:50 p.m. In 50 minutes, one drop of water doubling every second would fill Yankee Stadium. Does anybody know when the stadium would be half full? Right, 1 second before that. Does anybody know when the stadium would only be 3% full, when the grass would just be a little bit wet? 12:47. So his takeaway from this was, you have an exponential problem, and it starts at noon, but you don't even realize there's a problem until 12:47. So you have 50 minutes to live, and you don't even realize you have a problem until there's only 3 minutes left. And we have a hard time thinking linearly. Or we have a hard time thinking exponentially. We think linearly, right? If we need to go 100 steps, we're going to go one step at a time. So when things double, when things go exponential, we have a hard time understanding that, and that's why we can't come up with solutions for those things. That's what makes them predicaments and not problems. So, what do we not have? This is what we always hear. Occupy Wall Street kind of reminds us of this. We're young, we don't have savings or wealth. We don't have a career, we don't have a house, we don't have roots somewhere in a community, and this is supposedly a bad thing. But I don't really think so. I mean, the career is a ball and chain. As soon as you start making money and you get your health insurance and your retirement, you have something to lose, right? And you're tied down to a certain job in a specific place. And if there's a lot of volatility, if you're in an uncertain world and you're trapped somewhere, that's not the best place to be. So I like to look at what we have instead as young people. Instead of being the guy with the ball and chain, we're this feather just kind of floating in the wind right now. So we have open minds. We don't have any social chains. We don't have financial or career chains. We have nothing to lose. We have the most current skills and knowledge. I'm sure you guys have all helped your parents figure out their iPhones or computers. And we have time. We have more time than the people older than us. And that's the most precious thing there is. Well, hopefully we do, but I mean that's the story of civilization. Everybody, at any point in time, there were people in the world who said the world's going to end, and they've always been wrong. So don't spend your youth worrying about the end of the world. Spend your youth building the future. Let the old people worry about the end of the world. So one of the things is that we expect what they fear. Old people fear change. They complain about how fast technology moves. I'm sure you've all heard this. Right? Oh, nobody can build a career anymore because your skills are outdated by the time you get hired. But we embrace it, right? This is called creative destruction. I don't know if you guys have talked about this yet. We embrace it and we expect it, right? We're actually upset if there isn't creative destruction. The iPhone 4S comes out instead of the iPhone 5. What the hell? So this is a totally different way of thinking from any society in human civilization. You guys think about things differently than anybody ever has. We have the good old days here. This is a car phone, right? And then this is a Matryoshka doll. Those are those Russian dolls that stack in each other. A guy made one of cell phones. And so you have, an old bag phone all the way down to an iPhone. Who wants to go back to the good old days? Maybe your parents do. I don't. So my opinion is that things will be better. And the question is how? How are things going to be better? Well, you guys already think uniquely about the world. You think about what's next. You think about short product cycles and that being a good thing. And your generation, and specifically you guys in this class, have a better understanding of economics than most people throughout history. And that allows us to understand how wealth is created and how humans can exist in prosperity on the world. So, again, before the advent of economics, societies would rise and fall with the state. Right? The Roman society came and went with Rome. But we might be past that now. We have a global division of labor. We have an understanding of economics. We have technology everywhere. There's 3 billion people in the world with access to the internet, which means at least half the world can get access to basically all of human knowledge. And there's billions of people who can read. At least 2 billion people are actually online at some point in time. So that's a third of the world. 33% of the world is literate right now. That's never been the case. So there's a saying, if something can't go on forever, it will stop. That's actually Herbert Stein's law. He was Ben Stein's dad. And so these predicaments that have been created for us by our predecessors, they're going to stop. They can't go on forever. And it's not going to be the end of the world. But it's going to be up to us to put it back together. And the knowledge that you guys are getting in this class is going to inform you as to how to do that in your own lives, which will create the new society, one person at a time. So Doug Casey at this Casey Summit had a couple funny quotes on time. You have the first one up there. He says, "The future is going to be worse than it has ever been, but it's also going to be better than you can ever imagine." And he said, "This is why we have time, because everything can't happen all at once." And the other thing he said was, given enough time, everyone is eventually proven right. So I'm relying on that second one to prove me right. So these are some of my favorite sites and YouTube channels. And I have an Austrian Economics group in town. If you guys are interested in that, we get together every 2 weeks. We talk about economics the first week of the month and history the third week of the month. So just shoot me an email and I can give you the skinny on that if you're interested in more. Yeah, thanks for your time. You guys have any questions or burning disagreements that you want to rip me apart on? Yeah.
You said you tried all kinds of IRAs and multiple mutual funds. What would you say would be the best thing to go into now?
It sounds like a cliche, but gold and silver. When money when money dies, that was the conference I went to. Money actually never dies. Currencies die. The stuff you have in your wallet right now is not money. It's currency. And what we're going to have in our lifetime is we're going to rediscover what money is. And gold and silver are going to do really well in that environment. So, and even if they don't, even if you don't make a bunch of money buying gold and silver, you'll be able to buy something with it. And in your lifetimes, you're going to see the paper in your wallets buy less and less, significantly less and less. But that's okay. There's a way out. So, anybody else have anything? Eager to take your quiz, huh? Okay, I'll get back to Sherri then.
Nobody else has any questions for David?
Hey, David,
Yeah.
Can you tell them what Austrian economics is?
Sure, yeah. So there's these different schools of economic thought, which you guys might touch on when you get into macro. There's Keynesianism, there's the classical school, there was a Manchester school for a while. The modern school that all the guys who are wrong all the time, like Krugman, are part of, is the neoclassical school. The Austrian school is called the Austrian school because it originated in Vienna. And so you had these guys, Karl Menger and Eugen von Bauwerk, and they came up with these ideas that added to classical economics. It was called the marginalist revolution. And that's where Austrian economics was born. And so this guy von Mises, who wrote Human Action, he was a student of von Bauwerk and Menger. And F.A. Hayek was also an Austrian in Austria. And When World War II happened, those guys left. They bugged out. They went to Switzerland. Hayek ended up in the UK. Mises ended up in New York. So the Austrian school kind of got exported. And it's been carried on in the US by Murray Rothbard. He was kind of the only guy carrying the torch on that for a while. And now it's starting to bud again because all this Keynesianism and this neoclassicalism, they're wrong about everything, right? What has anybody on TV ever been right about financially? Nothing. So people are rediscovering Austrian economics because it actually predicts the business cycle with good accuracy. And so the truth is kind of finally winning out because things are getting so bad. So that's what the Austrian school is all about, basically. Yep.
Do you guys talk about like what sort of economic proposals are being put forward, like the 999 plan or the 59-point plan or whatever?
Yeah, or the fair tax or whatever, so-called. We always end up talking about politics. I really try and stay away from that. There's two things that I really like to talk about. One is the economic theory, and the other is what we can do. There's a guy, David Icke, who you guys might be familiar with. He's like a way loony conspiracy theorist guy, but he has this really great saying. He says everyone's always describing the prison, right? They're telling us what the bars look like, how thick the walls are, how bad the lock is. And he's like, I don't care about the prison. I want to know where the key is. And so that's what we try and talk about. What's the key, right? I want out. So.
David, you mentioned the Austrian business cycle. In a nutshell, describe that.
Sure, yeah. So the booms and busts right now are always blamed on some specific group. And it's never the government, right? It's like, greedy speculators or Wall Street. And the Austrians ask the question, they say, if economics starts with individual interactions, which you guys are learning about now, and everyone has a different value scale, then how can everyone make the same mistake at once, which is what a bubble is, right? Everybody invests in the same sector at once. And so they say, clearly there has to be some sort of force that is having authority over a large group of people to get them to all make the same mistake. And so they trace the business cycle back to central banking and essentially controlled money. Because if you can control the value of money, you control at least half of the economy. Right? Money is half of every transaction. You trade money for goods. And money is just a commodity, just like anything else. And so if the government has control of money or the Federal Reserve, they literally have a price control on at least half of the economy. And so by playing with the value of money, they can create these bubbles, basically, where everyone floods into real estate or .coms by making credit cheap and inflating. And people seek yield, so they'll get into these bubbles. And then the bubble inevitably collapses because if something can't go on forever, it won't. And so the Austrians trace the blame back to that, centralized control of money. That's how you get massive mistakes on a global scale at the same time. It's not possible otherwise. Yep.
So, could you tell us about some of these keys?
Sure. Well, one is that the world's not going to end. And so don't worry about that. And the other is, understanding money. Originally I was going to talk about money, but it would have been really technical and probably much more boring. So most people don't know what money is. We're all trying to make money. We're trying to preserve our wealth. But if we don't know what it is, how can we do anything with it? If you don't know what an internal combustion engine is, how can you become a car mechanic, right? And so understanding what money is, understanding that money is a commodity, right, and how money arises gives you a lot of those keys. I mean, that's what leads you to gold and silver as a way to avoid this, or as a way to hedge out of it. The other thing is kind of having a global view of the world. That's something else I didn't have when I was your guys' age. I was big, USA. Travel. If you guys have the opportunity, travel. You guys have kind of grown up in the TSA police state. I don't know if you guys remember traveling in the 90s. You used to be able to go to the airport gate, like where you board the plane, even if you didn't have a boarding pass, to greet your loved ones and stuff. I just went to Australia this spring. I got on a plane without showing anybody my ID. I got my boarding pass, I went through the metal detector, I got on the plane. And so there's a whole world out there with people who think differently and different regulations, and it's good to be aware of that. So that's another one, is you're not trapped unless you think you are. And so it's a big world out there. 19 out of 20 people in the world live outside the US. Keep that in mind. Yeah.
With gold and silver, would you want to buy when they were lower?
Ideally. But the past and the future don't exist, unfortunately. They're just abstractions. All that exists is right now. So they're going a lot higher. And they might go lower in the short term. I mean, there's going to be massive volatility because the market's trying to discover the prices of things right now. That's what volatility is. It's a price discovery mechanism. And it can't because the government keeps trying to prop these industries up and prop these bad financial assets up. So that's why you see all this volatility. So there's going to be that in gold and silver too. And it's going to be rough. But they will end the day. If you buy an ounce of silver, an ounce of gold, you're going to have an ounce of silver, an ounce of gold. If you have a $100 bill, you're going to be using it as kindling at some point. So, yep.
So what gives gold and silver its value besides that it's shiny and we can
Yeah, that's a good question. So all value is imputed, right? Nothing has intrinsic value. Intrinsic value doesn't exist. So gold and silver have, you could say, high, stable, imputed value. And silver specifically has a lot of industrial uses now that it didn't 100 years ago. And so the dynamic for silver has totally changed. What actually makes gold useful as money is that it's rare, it doesn't corrode, it's easily divisible, it's fungible, which goes with divisibility. So you can, if you cut a gold coin in half, it's worth half a gold coin, right? If you cut an iPod in half, it's not worth half an iPod anymore. If you rip a dollar bill in half, it's not worth half a dollar bill. And actually the fact that gold isn't used for a lot of industrial uses makes it a good money because the supply and demand is very stable for gold. With silver, you have constant demand, so it always has to be mined. So if mining stopped with silver, the above ground supply would go away in a matter of months, less than a year. And so that's going to lead to increased volatility, right? As your supply goes down, your demand is going to go up, your price is going to go way up. Or if your demand is flat and supply goes down, price is going to go up. So with gold, if they stop mining gold, it would take like 45 years for industrial demand to use up the gold that's above ground. So because there's a lot of it and it's not going anywhere, that gives it stable purchasing power relative to all the other stuff that we need. So that's part of what makes it a less volatile money, which is what makes it a good commodity to form the basis of a currency, which is what money ultimately is. Money is the basis of a currency. And we don't have any money in this country anymore. So, yeah.
Are you suggesting returning to a gold standard then, or is that?
Michael Maloney has an article titled "Gold Standards Suck." He's a huge fan of gold, and I'm not necessarily a fan of gold or silver. I just think it's a good place to be. But he's a huge fan of gold. He says gold standards suck because when you get the government involved in something that would otherwise be good, they screw it all up. So you don't need the government involved in your money, right? How many of you guys have PayPal accounts? Or transact on eBay. Have you ever done an international transaction? You sell something to somebody in Australia or Europe, it's cake, right? You say, this sold for $20 and they get their price in euros or whatever. And so we don't need governments to do the transacting for us anymore. We don't need them to set the value of money. We already have all these mechanisms to automatically set the value of money and deal with exchanges. Again, that didn't exist before. Maybe government served a purpose in regulating the value of money 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But today we have all these new tools, which give us a whole new way to build the economy and to create the world that we want, which our parents don't think that way, but we do, so we can do that. Yep.
Isn't the uses for gold actually changing because some of the best conductors still, for new technology that's being created, almost all the new computers now are having the little pins that plug in stuff that are gold, and I think that it's starting to everything to be more because it's really good conductor.
Yep, and it doesn't corrode too, that's what makes it good money too when you're carrying around coins anyway. Technology has actually made gold plating a lot thinner, which has kept demand down relative to what it would have been because there's a lot more electronics, but they've made the plating thinner. So yeah, there is that demand dynamic though, and especially for silver, because silver's cheap. So if you want a good conductor, gold, silver, and copper are the best conductors. It's silver, copper, and then gold. And so, again, the price mechanism kind of determines what gets used. So if the price of gold goes up, they're going to look for alternatives, but the demand will drive the price of gold higher. Yeah. Yeah.
We saw with the euro, a lot of countries trying to come together with a single currency, but that has obviously failed. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it was the fact that they had one currency, because they're still using a central bank. Do you think that it's possible to have a currency without a central bank managing?
Yeah, it was done globally. I mean, the U.S. didn't have a central bank until 1913, right? And we had the Industrial Revolution with no central bank. We had the Industrial Revolution on gold coins. And there used to be one currency for the entire world. It used to be gold. That's how transactions were settled internationally. And so it's been done before, and I think it will be done again.
But do you think that there's enough gold for that to work? I mean,
Yeah, again, technology helps us there, right? And the quantity doesn't matter, because price, that's what price is, right? We'll never run out of oil, for example, ever. It's just the price will get so high that people will use something else. That's what economics is all about, allocating scarce resources. So you could say, well, there's not enough gold for us each to have, a crew grand in our pocket and go around buying stuff with gold coins. That might be true, but we have all these electronic banking systems now, right? There's actually one out there, goldmoney.com, where you buy gold that's in a vault, and then you just electronically trade gold grams. And we can do that with credit cards, right? You have a credit card account that says, you have an ounce of gold, and when you swipe it, a tiny fraction of an ounce gets transferred electronically, and just the ownership changes. So we have all these new tools. Maybe there was a problem with that, and we have these new tools to solve this.
So then, does the gold even need to exist? I mean, what if we just said we're going to trade?
Right.
Imaginary puppies.
Well, that's what what Bitcoin is, right? Yeah. So that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is not backed by anything, but it's not mandated. You don't have to use it. There's no law. There's no gun pointed at your head that says you have to use Bitcoin, like we have legal tender laws. And Bitcoin's not backed by anything, but it's secure. It's based on these cryptographic keys that are impossible to break, essentially. And so, yeah, maybe something like that would emerge. The only thing with gold and a commodity money is it's a check on fraud, because ultimately you go to the bank and you say, I want my money back. I don't want currency. I want my money back. I want the value behind my money. So. Right. Yeah. They give you a gram or something. Yeah.
So are you better off to buy stock in gold and silver, or are you better off to buy gold? I mean, because you see commercials now for it. Like, what are these gold coins? We live in Alaska, so people are hoarders, right? Traders. So, people that I know people in my neighborhood that do it. They have like gold bars in their safes. I mean, is that the smarter thing, or are you better off to just buy stock?
You shouldn't buy anything if you don't understand it.
Virtual gold? I don't know.
Yeah, you shouldn't buy anything if you don't understand it. So don't do anything that I say. Like, seriously, if what I say is interesting, go and research it. And that's one of the things, like Goldline and these ads, that you see on TV. They charge these huge premiums, but people don't understand what they're buying. They hear some guy on TV who doesn't know anything about economics, and he says, "Buy gold, the world's ending." Well, the world's not ending. But if you were going to buy gold, spend an hour, 2 hours just looking at how to buy it. There's some coin shops in town, and there's a bunch of miners in town who sell the stuff at like almost no premium. And so there's a lot of good ways to get it, and there's ways to store it. There's
So you do recommend physically?
There's paper assets. Yeah, that's the only way you have it. The thing about gold and silver is it's the only store of value, sort of, that is not also someone else's liability. So if you own a stock, if you have a certificate, it's a promise that someone else will pay you for it if you sell it. So your asset is someone else's liability. Whereas if you have, an ounce of gold or an ounce of silver, or even stuff, right? If you go to the transfer station and get a piece of furniture, whatever, it's your piece of furniture. It's not somebody else's liability. And so that's the reason to physically hold gold or silver. And that was one of the things when money in the United States and in the rest of the world was backed by gold, people could go and take the asset, right? They could take possession of the asset. And so they had the ultimate check on the banking system. They had the ultimate check on government. We hear that bank runs were the reason we needed a central bank. Bank runs were a method of getting rid of fraud in banking, right? They didn't have to go down and protest on Wall Street. They went to their bank and said, "I want my gold." The bank ran out of gold. That was the end of the bank. And who lost their money then? The bankers lost their money. So that's the reason to have it physically. But yeah, one of the interesting things is all these solutions that were cooked up 100 years ago to the problems of the day have created much, much bigger problems today. I mean, if you go back and read history, the 1910s, 19-teens, about the reason for all these regulations and like the Federal Reserve coming into existence, and you compare that to the problems that we see today that people are protesting now, they pale in comparison. And so, there are all these unintended consequences of intervention in people's free exchange. And that's what it's up to us to figure out. So. Sure.
Just I'm curious about your personal opinion. Do you think that there's any place for that we need government regulation?
No.
About the tragedy of the commons when no one owns something and you can't divide it. Like
the only thing that prevents all goods are scarce. Everything has some level of scarcity. And so property ownership is how we delineate between scarce goods. The only time that we have something that's non-scarce is when the government prevents property ownership, right? So, you're talking about tragedy of the commons, there's externalities, there's like environmental externalities, where a big corporation pollutes a river, and it says, oh, see, it's an externality, they've given this problem to a third party. Well, again, back before all this corporatism, this this kind of fascist system that we have, the people downriver would actually sue the company, right? They'd sue the company for a property rights violation, because that's what it was, because clean water is a scarce resource. Mm-hmm. But now, I mean, the corporations and the state collude, and so if you take a lawsuit against, Dow Corning or something like that, you stand no chance. And so the government actually creates those problems. The market solves those. So.
Well, I don't mean to draw on an argument, but what about? I mean, how do you divide an ocean where people are fishing and fish are going back?
Yeah, that's a little more complicated problem, and we have technology to enable that now that maybe we didn't have a while ago. It's one of the things like the Constitution and the federal government was created because information traveled slowly between states. That's the reason we have Congress. That's why you sent your representative to D.C. Information doesn't travel slowly anymore, right? So why do we have them? We have the internet. The president was there because if someone invaded, they needed to have someone who could quickly round up the militias and have a military to defend the country. But again, information travels quickly. We have airplanes, right? We don't have to travel by wagon to Washington, D.C. to go, save the country. And so all these reasons for these institutions that we've just grown up with, I think need to be questioned. And we're going to have a big chance to question them because they're all failing. So, and a lot of those problems, how do you delineate property ownership in the seas or in the air, right? In the air, we've solved that. We've solved that for electromagnetics, and we've solved that for air travel. Right? We have these corridors that the airlines use, so maybe they would be the property owners.
Clean air.
Well, yeah, clean air is another one. And how do you even gauge clean air? We have tools to do that now, and we can track, atmospheric patterns and wind and all this stuff. So these are kind of problems to think about. But the real thing for me, it boils down to voluntary exchange benefits both parties, and coercive activity destroys wealth. So if we can eliminate coercive activity, how great would the world be? How would we have roads? Well, maybe we wouldn't need roads. Maybe we'd be in flying cars or something, or we'd be living off planet. Who knows? But those are fun kind of little tangent discussions to have that we talk about at my my book club meetings.
Can you put your email back up?
Oh yeah, sure.
It's also low on the cutoff.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know how to fix that.
Write it on the whiteboard.
There you go.
Yeah.
Guys, I'll read that.
What's IEEE?
IEEE.
IEEE. It's the Institute of Electrical and Electronics.
Okay.
All right, let's give David a hand.